I'm very pleased to introduce our commencement speaker, Pastor Eugene Cho. Today, our students begin their journeys full of hope, seeking a place, person, a belief upon which to build a life's commitment. Eugene has his own journey. An immigrant from Korea as a child, Eugene came to a life of faith at age 18, and a few years later was at Princeton Theological Institute. Eugene and his wife continued their journey by establishing Quest Church, a multicultural, multi-generational urban church in Seattle, Washington. The Gospels call us to action. Eugene responded to Jesus' call to serve the poor by creating 1 day's wages, a program by which each of us contributes 1 day's wages to help the poor of the world. In his typical fashion, Eugene's initial contribution was 1 year's wages. We are founded by the Sisters of Providence, whose charism is the charity of Christ impels us. You can see that at Providence Plaza. We are a Providence ministry with a mission to serve especially the poor and vulnerable. We're very pleased to have Pastor Cho with us this morning. He has heard the same call as the Sisters of Providence, and so he has responded just as they have, with uncommon courage.
Good morning, everyone. Let's try that once more. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, thank you. Well, let me first read some formal introductions and gratitude, and then I have some notes that I'd love to just share with you. To President McAllister, the University Board, to the distinguished members of the faculty, to the diverse alumni, special guests, family, and friends, it is an honor to be here at the University of Great Falls. Most of all, it is a joy and honor to be here with the toast of the day, the class of 2014. Let's give them a big round of applause. It is truly an honor to be with you today. It's an honor to hear the stories shared at last night's baccalaureate service. It's an honor to be recognized by this university, and it's an honor to deliver today's commencement speech. If I may, I'll share a little bit of myself. To know me is to know that faith in God and engaging the world matter immensely to me. And while this may sound funny, this is why my 3 children have names that are both biblical and pop culture references. For example, my oldest daughter's name is Jubilee, a reference from Leviticus, where every 50th year in which slaves and prisoners are set free and debts would be forgiven. Jubilee is also an X-Men character. Okay, wrong crowd. Our second child, her name is Trinity, an important theological truth of God's identity. Don't judge me, she's not yet seen the film, a character from the film Matrix. Only the students. And my 11-year-old son, his name is Jedi. Yes, Jedi from Star Wars. From the Bible, Jedi comes from Jedediah, Solomon's Hebrew name, which means God's chosen beloved. When I share this story, people, especially young people, often ask me, Pastor Eugene, how did you convince your wife to name your son Jedi? Teach me, O Yoda. So if I may, I'll share 2 minutes of how you can convince your future wife to name your son Jedi. I said to my wife, Min-hee, let's name our son Jedi. She instantaneously said, no. I said, "Will you pray about it?" She said, "No." At the 8th month, I went to my wife and I said, "Minhee, I love you. That's not a trick. I love you." And I said to her, "It is only fair, right, and just that you, the mother of this child, you carrying this baby in your body, it's only fair that you should name our son." And she was so happy. So I said to her, "Here's your choice." You see what I just did? It's Jedi or Frodo. One of these two, you choose. Thankfully, she chose the right name. Now, what do I share during this time? I thought it might be cool if I shared about those many years that I grew up here in Montana. And then I realized I've never lived in Montana. So if I can, I'd like to share 5 quick things, especially for the graduating class, if I may. And if this might serve as an encouragement to others, that would be great. But these 5 things are words of encouragement for you. If I were to ask you to think about completing this sentence, courage is blank, I suspect that in this room, with students and faculty and guests and family, there would be hundreds of responses to complete that question. Courage is blank. And that's for you to decide. The journey of life is for us to explore what and how we would answer that particular sentence. But I'd like to share 5 of many of my particular explorations with you. Here's the first. Courage is self-awareness. Or in other words, be really careful when you pray for courage. Now let me explain this. I've always found it to be very interesting that people say, "I want to be more courageous. I pray for more courage." Because I wonder if we understand what it is that we're asking for. You see, when you want more courage, when you're asking or praying for more courage, what you're saying is that you want to be confronted by situations and circumstances in our lives that will provoke courage. Which means courage is not doing things that are easy for us. Courage is not engaging in things that are familiar with us, but rather courage is self-awareness of our fears. So maybe this is a warning. Be careful that you ask for a life of courage, because what you're saying is that I want to be aware of the fears in my life, and it's those particular situations that will provoke courage in our lives. One of my favorite theologians by the name of Karl Barth, he says, quote, "Courage is fear that has said its prayers." I came here when I was 6 years old. After 1 week, went to Sherman Elementary School. I don't know about you, but I am the only person that I know that flunked first grade. I was voted the shyest person in my middle school, grew a stuttering problem, and it was in high school I realized that when I prayed for courage, what that meant was not some sort of lightning that would hit me, but a self-awareness of confronting my fears. And the scariest thing that I could do was auditioning for a theater play at Lowell High School, Midsummer Night's Dream. And I was cast for the robust role of the wall. 2 lines. And those lines changed my life. So 2, courage is perseverance. Or in other words, you should know you're going to face a lot of obstacles in life. Now, you don't have to be old or wise. You can be a youth or a college student or someone in their latter stages of life. All of us know that we're going to face obstacles and opposition and barriers in our lives. So courage is not a perfect life, but rather is a life that is tenacious and we're able to persevere, to not give up, to be steadfast. As President McAllister shared, I pastor, among a few other responsibilities, a church in Seattle, Washington. We have many, many college students that attend our church. On one occasion, I went to a local Taco Bell at my neighborhood. I was hungry, desperate. And so for lunch, I walked into this Taco Bell store and I noticed that I kind of recognized the cashier. I wasn't quite sure. But as I walked in, this young female cashier looked at me and said, "Hello, Pastor Eugene." I wasn't quite sure how I knew her, but she explained that she goes to my church, and then I noticed that her face turned immensely red. She began to awkwardly talk. It was not one of my better conversations. I said, "Are you okay?" Face turning even redder. She says to me, "This is really embarrassing." And I said, "Well, what are you embarrassed about?" She says to me, "Well, I just graduated from college, and I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be here working at Taco Bell." And I said to her, "You don't have to be embarrassed." She began to actually weep. Customers behind me thinking, "What a jerk customer. Just order your chalupas." But it was a moment that we need to talk, and I said to her, I'll just call her Jane. I said, "Jane, it takes courage to pursue the dreams that we have. And sometimes we experience mountaintops, we experience valleys, but know that even in our mountaintops and in our valleys and everything in between, God is with us. Don't quit. Be steadfast. Be tenacious." Here's the third thing I'd love to share with you. Courage is humility. At last night's baccalaureate service, I think this was something that I don't have to remind you graduates of. You're not an island to yourself. While we should be proud and while we should celebrate, you should not just beat on your chest saying, "I did this alone." But the truth is, as you know, because courage is humility, a village, a town, a city, parents, grandparents, uncles and aunts and siblings, someone invested in you. Someone loved you. Someone prayed for you. Someone believed in you. Someone helped you. Someone encouraged you. So be grateful, but commit yourself to be that someone for others as well. So I was 6 when I came. My parents, my father is joining me here today. They were in their late 30s. My mother in her early 30s when they immigrated to this country. They knew 3 words: hello, goodbye, and a variation of thank you were the only words that they knew when they first set foot in this country. They worked at our family grocery store, waking up around 6 in the morning, and the store closed at 11 p.m., and so often they would return home at midnight. They did this for years. My parents were both born in what is now called North Korea. And some of you who understand political reality, you know that North Korea now is probably one of the most oppressive regimes in the world. When they were children, there was only one country, one Korea, before a war broke out that would separate nations and families into 2. My parents were both born in dire poverty. They weren't able to go to school. And so their only ambition was, we have to go to America so that our 3 sons, I'm the youngest of 3, that their sons would be able to pursue that which eluded them. And so when I graduated from college, I saw my father do something that I've never really seen him do. He wept. Now, if I'm honest, I did see him cry kind of once when the San Francisco 49ers lost to the Cowboys in the NFC Championship many, many years ago, but that did not count. When I graduated from college years ago, I'm 43, my father wept, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. And he said to me, Eugene, now that you have graduated from college, I can now die in peace. Many people have invested in us. Courage is humility. Courage is gratitude. Number 4, courage is human dignity. Or in other words, we look at people in the eyes. Now let me explain this to you. Jesus does some amazing things in the Gospels. Healings, feedings of thousands of people, but the aspect of his life and leadership that most amazed me was that he took the time to look at people in the eyes. You see, when we look at people in the eyes, we are saying, we acknowledge you. I see you. I believe you matter. I believe that you have value. I believe that you're created in the image of God. Regardless of who they are, where they live, if they're on this side or that side, no matter their political beliefs, no matter who they are, when we see someone, we believe that they too are created in the image of God and deserve our respect and dignity. I love the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, an ostracized, marginalized woman in her village. And Jesus stops, speaks to her, looks at her in the eyes. Or how about that woman in the Gospel of Luke chapter 8? In her mind thinking, this woman who's been bleeding, if only I can touch his clothes, I will be healed. And this woman worms through the crowd, finally touches Jesus' clothes, and Jesus says, "Who touched me?" Like he didn't know. But Jesus wanted to look at her and say, "You matter." In our culture today, if we're honest, that are more about polarization, demonization, vilification, the otherization, it is really important that we enter into the larger world with this courage of respect and human dignity. Let me share a story with you to prove this point. So when I was in college, I double majored in psychology and theater. Graduated with a degree in psychology, but for several years I was in the theater department and eventually realized that I wasn't very good. I was cast for 2 plays in college. In one of those plays, I was playing a homeless person. The director, being very blunt, he was great, but he was very blunt. He came up to me one day and he said, "Eugene, you're not very good." He appreciated honesty, so I said, "I hate you." But we reconciled. But he says, "Eugene, you don't understand this person's narrative. You don't understand this person's story. You're jumping on lines. You're just regurgitating words." And so he challenged me to spend several nights, several days out on the streets of San Francisco, where I grew up. And so with some bad stereotypes and generalizations in my mind, I dressed a certain way and entered San Francisco and hung out on Market Street in front of a department store called Macy's for 4 days and 3 nights. It was cold. It was not pleasant. It was miserable. But the one thing that I remember to this day that has shaped my worldview, that has shaped my understanding of courage, was the experience of sitting in front of this department store for days and nights. And of the thousands of people that walked past me, even those that threw some change my way, that for those days and nights, not a single person looked at me in the eyes. And I had never felt so insignificant, so invisible in my life. Mother Teresa, I think, was right. The greatest disease in this world is loneliness. May you have courage to look at people in the eyes, including those that do not look like you, think like you, feel like you, are you. Last thing I'll share. Courage is sacrifice. Or in other words, everyone loves the idea of courage until there's a personal cost. And that's the truth. If I were to ask you right now, how many of us here love justice, for example? Whether you are Catholic, Christian, whatever faith, or just even an atheist, everyone loves justice. If you said, "I hate justice," we would say, "What a jerk." No degree for you. Pull out your name right now. But maybe the truth is we all love the idea of justice. Maybe we're more enamored by courage until it requires a cost, a sacrifice. Maybe it would be good for me to warn you, courage always requires sacrifice. Justice always requires a personal cost. Now, I learned this the hard way. About 7 years ago, I was traveling with a few other friends doing research in several countries around the issues of poverty, around issues of maternal health and maternal health and crisis and AIDS and child deaths. Prior to that, I had learned and studied all the books about issues of local and global poverty. But I remember visiting a village in a country called Burma, otherwise known as Myanmar for some. Now, prior to, I had never heard of that country aside from a song that a band named U2 wrote called Walk On in tribute to a woman named Aung San Suu Kyi, the democratically elected president who was under house arrest for about 20 plus years. So I'm in this jungle makeshift classroom of a village of people that had been fleeing away from an oppressive government seeking to kill them. And as I entered this particular classroom, unlike your university, you need to use your imagination, a chalkboard in the front that's been just used probably for years. Chairs and desks that have been put together from trees. And it was a classroom for 1st to 5th graders, and I believe there may have been about 15 to 16 desks and chairs. I walk in, and as I'm listening to my host, I could not help look at a poster about the size of this podium that was pasted on the chalkboard. To this day, it was probably one of the most offensive, hideous, disgusting posters I have ever seen. I couldn't stop staring at this poster because it was so offensive. The host, noticing that I was disturbed, actually said, Reverend Cho, please come closer, in his broken English. As I drew closer, he gets on his knees, and I should explain to you what this poster is. It was a poster of many photos taped on, so there's a collage of photos. And they were photos of men, women, and children with missing body parts and oozing blood of their bodies. A classroom for 1st to 5th graders. He gets on his knees and he says, Reverend Cho, look. And he points to the bottom row of this big poster and he says to me, these green things are landmines. And we must teach our children how to avoid landmines. The world is broken. And it's calling for women and men of courage. I spoke with one of the leaders of the village, and as we were talking about education, because education is so important, you all know this. I asked him, I said, what's hard about education in your village? And in his broken English, he says, paying salaries, teachers. Being inquisitive, I said, well, how much are their salaries? He sticks out 4 fingers. He says, $40. So I said, per day. He laughed and shook his head. And I go, I'm sorry. $40 a week. His face turns serious and stoic. He says, no. In my mind, I'm thinking, this is crazy. $40 a month? And so I asked him, $40 a month? He shakes his head. $40 a year? And he finally nodded his head. I was reminded of that quote from Mother Teresa, where she says, if you can't feed 100 people, then just feed one. Now, I don't want to give you ridiculous comments. You're not going to change the entire world. Are you serious? You're not going to change the entire world. But I will tell you, you and I have the capacity to impact the world of some. And the best part of wanting to change the world is that you will get changed in the process. Leo Tolstoy, one of my favorite novelists, a Russian writer and philosopher, once wrote, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Don't just change the world, be open to change yourself. Let me close with this last comment, if I may. As a pastor of our church and the founder of this organization called One Day's Wages, and President McAllister shared a little bit about this. We started One Day's Wages about 4 years ago. We were convicted, and so we gave up a year's wages, and it took us 3 years to save and simplify and sell off things that we did not need. It was not pleasant. It was painful to sell my midlife crisis card. At a 1989 blue Mazda Miata that I called Blue Thunder. Our kids, piano lessons, soccer camps, all were a hold for 2 years. But what's been amazing is in sharing this vision of One Day's Wages, where 100% of everything that we raise go to projects around the world to come alongside people, to empower them to lift themselves out of poverty. That 1 year's wages of $68,000 have been multiplied 100-fold. Over 13,000 people from 44 countries have given over $2.2 million. And it continues to increase and grow. We've had people do amazing campaigns. Not just give their day's wages. We had a 16-year-old student bicycle from Alabama to Los Angeles to raise money for clean water. We had a mother of 3 children inspired by One Day's Wages choose to shave her head. I thought that was strange. And she invited her family and friends to help her raise money for the famine in East Africa. And she raised $18,000. I see a lot of women with hair here. Think about it. Stories after stories. It takes courage. In my role as a pastor, I've also had the joy and privilege of pastoring people of many generations, including those that are in their latter stages of life. In the last 2 years, I've buried more people in the last 2 years than in the first 20 years of being a pastor. And in these conversations with these older brothers and sisters, I've always asked them as a pastor, how can I be praying for you? Do you have any regrets? Are there any things that you want reconciliation with? And it's been amazing because every single person using different words have said very similar things. I've never heard anyone say on their final breaths, on their deathbed say, I wish I made more money. I've never heard this. I've never heard anyone say, I wish I owned a bigger home. I wish I rode more rodeo. I don't think. I've never heard, I wish I had more gadgets or more toys. They've always been one of these 3. I wish I was more courageous. I wish I spent more time with the people God called me to. I wish I pursued after God's heart. And so may this be an early encouragement to you to live life without regrets. Be courageous. God bless you. Congratulations.